I get to be here today because Pastor Rudy is having some time with his dad and his sons, and he's fishing for real. Yeah, I can't wait to hear these stories. He said last night that he was going to catch 2 fish, so we'll see. But I'm just really, really glad that he gets to have this break. And we are also taking a break because if you've been following us over the past few weeks, you'll know that Pastor Rudy and David Whitlock were taking us through some of the Psalms, but we are not doing that today. We're focusing on the men because it's Father's Day. And fun little fact, or at least I don't know how fun it is, but my husband's a historian, so I thought this was kind of cute. That Mother's Day actually was celebrated first. We started celebrating moms 2 years before celebrating dads, so sorry, but at least we're celebrating you now. And I hope that everybody's gonna have a great day celebrating. But typically, I think when we think of Father's Day or the things that we see on Father's Day, they're just kind of silly. I mean, there's silly commercials or rugged, like for tools and trucks and barbecue things and not Priuses. Sorry if you drive a Prius, but they're not the rugged thing. But anyway, I just think that we don't really kind of get the heart behind what a man can be, and there's just not a lot of depth that is portrayed for them. So I also think that extends beyond Father's Day, and unfortunately, I think a lot of things that today's culture and the media, how they portray men, is just not great. I think that that's unfair, for one thing, but I also think that it's unhealthy and it's unbiblical. If you think about shows like The Bachelor, and I know I'm probably going to get some hate on this right now because I'm not a fan. I don't really watch it, but I just don't really like what it stands for. If you're not familiar with it, it is about a guy, a bachelor, and he is trying to find the love of his life. And there's multiple women, and they're all competing to try and stay in this game and hope that he gives them a rose so that they don't get eliminated because they want to be the last one chosen and have the happily ever after. And I just want to say, I read a little bit on this. So far, maybe one of them is still married out of all of the seasons, so I'm just saying. But I think there are a lot of values in this show that are compromised. I read an article. Actually, I don't really like the show for this main reason. I don't like drama. And there's a lot of catfighting. And trying to explain this better to you, which I'm not doing right now, but I don't watch it, but it's, women are competing for this man. And some of these women, they might not even really want this guy, but because they see that there are other women competing, they just want it. And that's not healthy. And some of the things that are happening in this is the guy, he's dating all these women all at the same time, and he's saying different things to all of them and doing all of these different things too, and supposedly it's romantic, and I'm not going to take that away from it, but I can guarantee you that he's not planning these dates. He's probably got a boatload of producers that are planning all these beautiful things, but there ends up being a lot of intimacy, and that's not, I don't think, how dating is designed to be. And to me, that is not acting in a godly way. And I think it sets an expectation that we've just come to accept. I think for women, it sets an example of a standard of who and what men should be. And I think that for men, it puts this pressure on having to be and look and act a certain way and be wealthy. And the result of this is, I think we all suffer. I think that our marriages and relationships suffer, and I think ultimately our kids end up suffering. But I want to challenge us to look at a more biblical view of manhood with that's characteristics like honor and confidence and discipline, respect and leadership. So with all of that in mind, today I am going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about how men can be that change. And not just for now, but for the future, and then how women can come alongside them and be a part of that. And I also want to talk just a little bit about the hope that we have that in spite of our current circumstances, or maybe something that happened in the past, that we can still change. So to help in illustrating this, I'm going to be looking at the kings. I was studying them recently, and there were a lot of kings, and a lot of them just really weren't that great at being kings. They had the power and the authority to lead their people into worshiping God, and they just didn't. And one example of that, and this is just one, is Amon. And you'll find his story in 2 Kings chapter 21. So I'm just going to read a little tiny part of that. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his father Manasseh had done. He followed the example of his father, worshiping the same idols his father had worshipped. He abandoned the Lord, the God of his ancestors, and he refused to follow the Lord's ways. That is not okay. I'm kind of a rule follower, so when I hear that somebody is refusing to follow God, it kind of makes me a little scared. But ultimately, he didn't reign for very long. His servants assassinated him, and then his son Josiah became ruler. And Josiah, he turned things around, and he did it by humbling himself before God and repenting and honoring the Book of Law. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on what the Book of Law is, but basically it was the first few books of the Bible, and it was there for these kings to refer to and so that they could revere God or respect him. It taught them how they were to obey and how they were to look to God. And the kings before Josiah, including Amon, they didn't use this. In fact, it got hidden away, and I don't know how long it got hidden away, but somebody found it and took it to Josiah, and when he read what this was, he just immediately repented and made a promise that he would keep God's laws. So he got rid of all of the idols and altars and high places and all of the things that distracted everybody from worshiping God, and he led his people back to God. And I just think this is an excellent example of how we can overcome what would have been a trajectory towards a really bad thing or a really bad legacy and changing that. And it's not an easy thing to repent or surrender to God. And culturally, I just don't think that most of us were really raised to have that kind of awareness or do that. And I think that there are a lot of exceptions made that don't hold us to that accountability. That brings me to another thing that I think is really important about Josiah, and that is that he really was that self-aware. As soon as he saw that, like I said, he repented and he started doing the things that God wanted him to do, that we're called to do for God. But he also went to his people and he admitted this to them and set the example of what it is to make that change. And I just think that is amazing. If you look at, he did exactly what Paul said. He preached it in 1 Timothy. Fight the good fight. Take hold of the external life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. That's really powerful. I mean, he could have kept it all to himself and just made those changes, but instead, he went to his people, and it's a way that he was influencing them. And we need to be able to influence like that too, because whether we like it or not, we're influencing people. We influence in our homes, we influence at work, we influence in our community. We probably influence when we're standing in line. We're 6 feet apart now when we stand in line, but I'm sure we're still influencing. And just admitting all of those things and being able to be aware of the influence that we are, it's humbling, but it's so powerful. I think Pastor Rudy makes an excellent example of this. He's here week after week just sharing his self-awareness and the things that he needs to change. And I can promise you he's not just doing it on Sundays. He's a really good example of that. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of us lack that kind of self-awareness. And it leads to living a life that is based on what the world says is okay. And I think a lot of times we even hide this from our own selves. And there's a struggle in admitting any areas of weakness. And that lack of awareness, that lends itself to us to building our own kingdoms and not furthering God's kingdom. And what I mean by that is that we have things that we need to do, and they're important, but they become in a way that we function outside of functioning with God. We're functioning independent from God. And it might be for work and home and not bad things, but sometimes it's just our own selfishness. And it's not fun to admit that about ourselves, but we have to. And other things get in the way too. There's a lot of battles that we're trying to navigate for different reasons. And some of them can be internal battles. Some of them can be something that is like anger, or you struggle with anxiety or trust. And those are rooted in things that maybe happened in our past. Or maybe they're happening to you right now. Or maybe they're more external. Maybe you really hate your job and you don't want to go. That's fair, but you got to go. Maybe you're struggling in your relationships. That's not a fun thing to deal with every day. Maybe it's actually something literally physical and you just struggle with pain, and it's just hard to face your day every day, but it doesn't have to be a hard thing for us to do on our own. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, it's not that we have to fight it alone. It's kind of like we're chasing our own shadows. He says, therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. When I think of that, I think of kind of being on a hamster wheel and just running and running and running nowhere fast. I don't run fast, so I probably wouldn't be running very fast on the hamster wheel, but I'm still not getting anywhere. Or you're just fighting and swinging like you're blind at these things that are getting in your way, whether they're actual things or inner demons. But here's the thing. And I am going to wrap it up with all of this. And I'm also going to explain why this is so important to me, that we don't have to face these challenges alone. We need to approach God. And it's not a sign of weakness when we approach God. And I know that weak is a word that most of us don't really like to hear or admit about ourselves. Men especially. I'm married to one. I think that men kind of like to think of being the Lone Ranger. They don't even like to ask for directions. I think they feel like it's a sign of weakness. It's just not. It's being valiant in our weaknesses with God as our strength. I'm going to say that just a little different way. We aren't weak when we go to God. We have strength in our weaknesses with God. I love that. I hope you love that. Because we don't have to keep navigating this on our own. We have the Spirit inside us, fighting with us. He's already won the battle. Paul says it in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and this is one of my very favorite verses. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. God is really good at being God and giving us the directions that we need. And that is what allows us to make that change. And it applies to all of us, but I am going to kind of address it separately today. So for the men, women, and kids, and not necessarily in that order, because ladies, I'm going to start with us. And please know that I'm speaking to myself on this. But I want to encourage you with this. Instead of just accepting the way that things are, or instead of constantly bringing things maybe to your husband's attention that you think need to change or that I think need to change, we need to come alongside our husbands and be encouragers. We do. And think of that as like being cheerleaders. One, because they'll like that. Two, because think about what a cheerleader is. They don't boo for their team when they're not doing well. They are cheering and they're excited and they're encouraging. And they might not really know everything that's happening in the game, like all the plays, and they're not acting like a coach trying to tell them how to do it. But they're very much a part of actively being aware of the game and cheering and encouraging. That's what we need to do. And do this for whoever they are, maybe our husbands, our boyfriends, our fiancés, our sons, nephews. We were just created for this. Way back in Genesis, we were created to come alongside our men and be helpers and supporters and encouragers. And I don't do this enough. And I kind of laughed, but I didn't laugh because it was not funny. But you know how Pastor Rudy will say that if he's about to speak on something, it just kind of like he gets dumped on the whole week before? I've totally been going through this because I'm trying to be encouraging and it's just not working out for me. And sometimes it's because I'm busy or I'm frustrated. Sometimes I'm just plain stubborn. And Pastor Rudy called me on that this week, and it wasn't very fun. But we need to hear these things, and we need to admit them about ourselves. And maybe you think that your husband or whoever it is that you need to be encouraging doesn't need this or wouldn't appreciate it, but he does, and he will. I know Jake would never, ever tell me, hey, babe, I want you to cheer for me and tell me how much you appreciate me. He wouldn't do that. He just wouldn't ever do it. But I know that it fuels him to know how much we appreciate what he does for me and our family, the sacrifices that he makes. That's important, and we need to be encouragers. I also want to add, I'm not saying that we need to expect more from our men, and you're welcome, men, for me saying that, because we shouldn't be expecting more from you. So, and it might look different than what we want from them, but what we really need to be doing is we need to be praying for them. We need to pray that our husbands are engaged in a spiritual battle for God so that they can lead our families. And we need to pray that their pursuits are spirit-led. So when they're in the workplace, that people see that in them, or we feel that in our homes, and that they're seen as being faithful with integrity, and that they influence in a godly way. That is huge. That is life-changing, and not just in their lives, but in everyone around. So be praying. Prayer is powerful. And you can just never underestimate the power of prayer, especially as a praying wife, especially as a godly wife, or a girlfriend, or a fiance. I just think that our prayers put us in a partnership with God. And I feel like it kind of makes us a wingman to our husbands, which is kind of cool. But praying, so important. Now, if you are a kid or you are a youth, and you have a dad who is not an example of the kind of man that God is calling him to be, and this is what makes this really personal to me, don't let that be your example. My dad, I don't really feel like he was the kind of dad that I needed. I'm trying to say this in a way, as I'm just kind of learning how this impacted me, and I'm unpacking how all of that looks and feels. But I just didn't feel like he was really present. And I felt like he didn't want to be around me. And I felt like that was my fault. And I would make excuses for him. Like when my parents got divorced, and he wasn't there anymore, but he always paid his child support. So in my mind, that made him a good dad, because I didn't want to have a deadbeat dad or that dad. And I'm not saying that my dad was a bad dad. It's just that he wasn't the kind of dad that I needed him to be for me, and I didn't see him following God as any kind of an example. So girls, if you see that in your daddy, don't go looking for that in other men. Look for a Josiah. I am so thankful that I have Drake, because he is that guy. And I'm also thankful for my mom, because she prayed for whoever my husband was going to be, I think probably from the day I was born. So that's just another example of how powerful prayer is. So look for Josiah. Now, boys, if you have a dad like that, then use Josiah as an example of what you should be, and don't be that guy. I want you to think about being a guy chasing after God's own heart. Just have humility and grace and lead with that. And do that now. Start doing that now, because that is going to impact your future and your family in incredible ways. So that's my encouragement to you. And men, last but not least, we see a lot of things that are acceptable now when it comes to priorities and values, things like we see in The Bachelor. But those things are not aligned with being godly. And I mentioned, like I said, some of those earlier in the Bachelor, but I'm going to be the bad guy here, and I'm going to ask you, could it be that some of you are being that kind of man? Are you being the kind of man and husband and father that you should be? And I'm asking that because I think sometimes you just don't think about it. I mean, it's really easy to put yourself first. We all do it. But how do you speak to your wife or your kids? Do you speak harshly? Do you even talk to them at all? Are you being intentional with the time that you spend with them and your kids and how you spend that with them and how you lead? Are you faithful? Are you faithful to your wife, to your kids, or to God? Those are big questions, and I get that, but I just really want to encourage you to ask yourself, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? Are you wanting to lead the way Josiah led and lead your way in a way that it honors God? Do you want to set examples for your kids? Because that'll make a difference. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just really passionate about making that change now and really analyzing that in yourself to be that change, because our world definitely needs it. And if there's any part of you, any part of this that hits you in any way, then just don't be that guy. Just don't. Because I know you don't want to be that guy for your kids. You don't want to have a daughter like me that has all these questions. You don't want that for your kids or for your wife. Because at the end of the day, you get to be the reason for the change. I really just think that we can all learn from Josiah. We can all be humble before God. And I think we can all have the awareness of who we're influencing and how. I think it's all just letting it be about God and letting God change us. So that's all I have to say, but I hope that it resonates somewhere with you, and I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, and I'm just going to close us out with a little prayer, and we get to keep having some awesome music with our worship team. Thank you for being the Father that you are, God. Thank you that you extend love and grace, and for being the example that we need to be. You just designed us to be that way. So I just pray that we can be that. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong or that we need you, but you're always there. I'm so thankful for that. And you're just waiting for us and you're equipping us. You're so good that way. And I pray that whatever I said or whatever I didn't say today, that it was just received in the way that it needed to be received. And I pray for any changes that need to happen in our lives and that we can feel your strength to be able to make those changes, God, for us, for our families, but really, God, just ultimately for you, because you deserve all of that and so much more. You're such a good Father. Thank you for being the Father that you are. We love you. Amen.